in the 60s and 70s, psychedelics were some of the most researched treatments in neuropsychiatry.
One of the biggest and most exciting topics is the re-emergence of psychedelics in healthcare.
MDMA-assisted therapy, where we can give MDMA, known on the street as ecstasy, sort of floods the brain with serotonin, which can lift mood and create a sense of trust.
Basically creating new pathways or allowing for the potential for that in the brain.
We've had patients that would tell us it's like the knots of my mind are being untangled. For a time there, it was, hot news. It was the next big thing.
So it's the same as 50 years ago.
We were making psilocybin, they were making LSD. It was available for prescription. By some accounts.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right.
Was it patented? How did that work?
Well, it was...
Brought to you with 10 Mile Ventures, building bold ventures for better health. Mental health is one of the biggest emerging healthcare problems of our generation. Things are accelerating. 1 in 3 people have some form of mental health disorder at some stage in life. But one of the biggest and most exciting topics is the re-emergence of psychedelics in healthcare. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Michael Winlo, who is the Chief Scientific Officer of Emyria, who are leading the charge in clinics for psychedelic-assisted therapy and research in the space. So today, we're going to explore what psychedelics actually are, what the hype is all about, and where we're going, and what it's going to take to actually make psychedelics go from just a hype and a bit of stigmatized science into mainstream clinical care. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks for having me. Great to see you.
Great to have you, finally. After all these years, I feel like I've been reporting on you since I started What the Health over 5 years ago. It's always been so exciting to see psychedelic therapy and a leader right here in Australia in the space. But perhaps for those that don't know who you are, can you tell us a little bit about what Emyria is and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so Emyria is the company that owns and manages the Empax Centre clinical network. So we have a network of clinical sites that treat patients with severe psychological trauma and treatment-resistant depression. We have locations in 4 states now, in WA, Queensland, Victoria, and soon New South Wales is just opening up. And we provide psychedelic-assisted therapy according to the careful guidelines outlined by the TGA under the authorised prescriber scheme for patients with difficult-to-treat mental health. As an organisation, though, we have a much broader sort of research and innovation agenda behind this as well. We know these treatments are tackling a really important unmet need, that the evidence, though, is still emerging. So one of the key things that we're involved in is paying close attention to how our patients are doing so that we can inform and improve the care protocols. We can support others doing drug development in the space. And hopefully we'd like to develop our own care programs that we can take nationally and abroad.
Awesome. And your reason for getting into the space is particularly interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose to delve into this area of healthcare that at the time really didn't have much hype and was a little stigmatized?
That's right. Well, my professional background, I was trained as a medical doctor and had that experience of what care delivery was like in a busy public health system. It's often about service delivery, moving the patients through, getting them well and moving them on. But you don't really spend much time knowing whether what you did worked, whether you could have done something different. And then my career changed and I spent some time in Silicon Valley at a company called Palantir. That kind of exposed me to the role of technology and data and all the things we perhaps weren't doing in a busy public hospital system. Ended up returning back to Perth, taking on a CEO role at a clinical trial site. And here the objectives shifted again, where we were really about getting really high quality data with participants in trials. If they got better, that was great, but the focus was on how strict the governance and management of those participants needed to be to get good quality data. And so we really saw that both worlds were kind of there was this dichotomy, between service delivery, not paying attention to what was happening, between paying a lot of attention to what was happening, but not really focused on trying to get necessary health outcomes in the trial process. So Emyria sort of stemmed from this idea that, are there treatments out there where the demand is huge for something different to work? Can we take advantage of that need for better evidence around an emerging treatment and the patient demand for something new, and combine those worlds and actually provide care, but also do it in a way that's actually learning with patients as we go? And so our initial foray was actually in the cannabinoid treatments space, where These drugs had just been rescheduled. Again, they arrived on the scene without a lot of evidence behind how they were used. Again, lots of controversy, lots of hype from obviously those making these drugs, but from a group that wasn't known to do a lot of the background research that normal drug development requires. And so we saw sort of an opportunity to kind of sit in the middle and actually provide care to those looking for a new treatment, but also collect the evidence that would help support treatment development. And it became clear a few years in that where was the frontier moving? It was actually the bigger problem that presented to us was in mental health, and most of our patients started to present for primary mental health issues, and we could see where psychedelics were starting to re-emerge as a potential treatment. And we thought we'd take our talents and our infrastructure into that direction. And so we started to prepare for trials in the field to start with. And then, like everybody, was kind of taken by the fact that the TGA changed their scheduling in February 2023. And that was really an impetus for us to go all in on psychedelic-assisted therapy and actually bring our talents and clinical infrastructure to that modality. And so, that's where Empax started.
Huge. Yeah. From Palantir back to Perth.
Yes.
That's quite the unconventional.
There might have been a wife involved who was feeling a bit homesick.
I see.
With a couple of young children. So, I'd spent 4 years in the healthcare team there, helping that practice grow. So for those who don't know, Palantir obviously is a much better known company now.
Household name now. It's
household name, yeah. At the time, though, it was this secretive, Silicon Valley startup who, as people may be aware, got its, startup funding from the intelligence community, their venture arm, and primarily was used in law enforcement and in the intelligence workflows with the Defence Force. But the technology was, applicable to many areas where data was messy, and you had domain experts who wanted to ask questions of their data but couldn't do that easily. So Palantir had solutions for that. And of course, healthcare was a terrific place to take that technology.
That's awesome. Yeah. So to take that jump from such a big emerging company with very structured data sets to something where there isn't much data and you're trying to forge ahead at the interesting intersection of, I guess, bridging evidence-based medicine with actual real-life outcomes. Yeah. That's quite the jump.
Yeah. Well, it sort of follows on a theme. What Palantir taught me was that, it is possible to do make much better decisions about what you're doing as long as you've got access to the good data, from it, and that the technology was getting better at allowing somebody who had a good question but wasn't necessarily a computer scientist, who could ask their question. So knowing that, the first thing we needed to do was get good data. We knew we could do something more useful with it. So coming back to Perth, taking up the clinical trial role was really an opportunity, because one of the mandates, one of the platforms, I guess, that I presented myself to say I could take on this job was that I could help digitize a lot of what was happening in the clinical trial workflows. And so one of my first jobs as the new CEO at Linear was to take us from paper processes into digital health capture.
The new age.
A new age, that's right, which seemed very obvious to me at the time. But obviously, for many reasons, a lot of healthcare still runs on paper, I think, because it's just easier to manage on one level. But obviously, it comes at a cost of not being able to do much with your data. So, but that experience, digitizing what we do in the trial space, also sort of taught me that it would be possible to do this in direct healthcare delivery as well. And that's the impetus to start Emyria.
Huge. That makes sense. And we're lucky to have people like you returning to Australia to lead that charge, given we tend to be a little bit more behind on that digital and tech front here. But I suppose the way you describe Emyria, it's pretty clear that you guys aren't just a psychedelic company, but you're actually trying to develop that new model of care and address a huge problem.
Absolutely.
Perhaps we should dig into a little bit of that problem. So what is fundamentally wrong at the moment, and why do we need this different approach to mental health and healthcare?
Well, you outlined very clearly in the introduction that mental health is like this huge growing chronic health condition now that we have. It's in fact one of the fastest growing chronic health conditions of them all. It's probably one of the highest prevalence chronic health conditions in our community as well. we're spending more and more on healthcare for mental health every year, but we're not getting better outcomes. The incidence is still rising, the prevalence is still growing. So we're clearly not tackling it effectively. And there are many contributing causes to that. But one of the challenges is we've just had a dearth of good treatments for a long time. And we, for example, in post-traumatic stress disorder, there'd been no new drug developments or approvals for over 20 years. So it just wasn't a lot of research or innovation going into that field. And so, really needed a fresh, completely new look at how we tackled, mental health. And so it was a big pressing need. It's a growing community and I guess, community significance in terms of cost and impact. And really needed people to bring something, different to that. And, psychedelics, in fact, was having its second resurgence, in the early 2000s and started to early in 2020, started to produce some signs that this could be a potential treatment for some of our most difficult to tackle mental health conditions. And but what it really needed was people to embrace it, figure out how to deliver it properly, and most importantly, pay attention to how it was working so that we can advance the field.
And why do you think the incidence of mental health problems is accelerating at such a rapid rate? From the Australian Institute of Health, it says that we've increased, or the burden of mental health problems has increased 31% since 2003. And around 1/3 of patients with depression currently have treatment-resistant depression, with a lot of, drugs often only working in about 50% of the population.
Yeah.
So why are we in this situation?
Right. Well, there's probably many contributing factors. I think, the way we live our lives now is we've got tremendous claims on our attention. We're often pulling our thoughts into many different directions. We could be living so many different lives, and we've only reflecting on where we sit. So I think that it's easy to compare ourselves to others and see what we don't have. I think part of it is an improved recognition for these mental health conditions as well. I think the generation prior often had a different language around what mental health was about, and so we didn't have the ways of describing our mental health to the extent we do today. So I think that's part of it. So there's probably several cultural societal shifts that are probably precipitating this as well. What we do know though is that those who are struggling with their mental health can be really affected. It can affect not only them, their ability to get obviously most out of life. It can affect the loved ones around them, and it has a huge impact, much greater than just the individual. And I think that's an important thing to recognise too, that if you can improve somebody's mental health, you're actually making a difference to that person's life and community in an important way as well.
Completely. The domino effects are very real. I think thankfully some of the stigma around it has become much more normalised over the last decade or 15 years. And I think we all know someone struggling or who have struggled with mental health close to us. Yeah. But I suppose jumping back to psychedelics, when we hear that term, people often think of the drug and magic mushrooms or MDMA and the more, I suppose, illicit substance side of things. Yeah. Can you tell us a bit more about psychedelics and why this is an interesting emerging field in the context of psychiatry and treatments?
One of the unique things about psychedelics is it changes our state of mind, and I guess the way we perceive the world is fundamentally what they're there to do. And that can allow a moment of reflection and, I guess, reorientation to one's self-situation and one's problems. And so when given alongside therapy, which is how we use it, we have a chance to hopefully guide somebody out of a negative mental health state into a positive one. These things, which can be done on therapy alone or with hard work or with some of the traditional medications, but it can take a lot of effort and it can be sometimes a difficult road. So in our context, we use the psychedelics really to open a psychological and biological window to get somebody towards recovery. So it's probably helpful to consider the conditions we're trying to treat, and then that can help explain where we see the psychedelics playing a role. So for somebody with post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, and this can happen to individuals who have experienced a traumatic event either in childhood or at their workplace, but it can be somebody who's had cumulative workplace exposure to trauma, like a first responder or a police officer.
Yeah.
These individuals get to a point where they become hypersensitive to stimulus around them, and their bodies are in this constant state of fight or flight. They're hypervigilant and extremely sensitive to sounds and noises and other triggers which might put them into that anxious state of mind. It's partly because their amygdala, a part of their brain that's responsible for the fear responses, is hyperactive, it's out of balance. And the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that normally tells us that everything's okay, goes quiet, and so you don't get that calibration. And so for those individuals, life can become really tough. They withdraw, they don't want to go to work, they avoid family, they can be really agitated easily, and it can be really debilitating. And so what we have today is a treatment, MDMA-assisted therapy, where we can give MDMA, known on the street as ecstasy, which has this unique feature in that it sort of floods the brain with serotonin, which can lift mood and create a sense of trust. It also can increase the amount of oxytocin in our mind as well, and that can make us feel safe and connected. And that allows the amygdala to quieten down for a while, brings the prefrontal cortex back online, and lets people discuss trauma or difficult, challenging content without being overwhelmed by fear or shame. And that's really, really important. So now we have this opportunity to guide somebody through therapy and help them sort of reframe the situation and realize, take a different, perspective on their triggers and reassure themselves that they are okay, they are now safe, and they can move on. And so that can be really, really powerful.
So it's kind of like unlocking different parts of the brain and pathways and allowing people to lean in a bit more.
Yeah, well, we think of MDMA as sort of a distinct feature to psilocybin, which I can talk about as well, and that contrast is kind of interesting. But, I mean, MDMA's primary role is that it lifts trust, decreases fear, lets people discuss difficult content without being triggered, and therefore therapy can land more easily, and the things you've been telling somebody in therapy for maybe years, suddenly, they're absorbed more deeply, and they can act on that, and they realize that they can, move ahead. And so, we've had patients that would tell us it's like the knots of my mind are being untangled, or the clouds lifting. I feel like wearing colours today because happy people wear colours. Like, these are things that were places that were hard to reach before when they're being really, overwhelmed by their condition, which suddenly become possible, and that's a lovely thing to see, after, struggling perhaps to feel like somebody's making progress. And we can work with those new insights and perspectives, and we do lots of follow-up supportive therapy to help turn these into daily habits and lift somebody from being unwell into, towards the path of recovery. MDMA, fortunately, it's quite activating as well, so it is worth mentioning also, I think, that it can raise blood pressure and heart rate, and it can make people feel a little bit anxious. And so that's something we do have to watch from a safety point of view. But in the carefully controlled environment that we provide it with pharmaceutical preparations, it's a very, very safe treatment. Psilocybin, on the other hand, is quite different. Whereas MDMA allows somebody to stay quite lucid and aware of their environment, psilocybin, on the other hand, is more like a true hallucinogen in that it can create a lot of crosstalk in the brain that for areas that don't typically communicate with each other. And we think what's behind that is a quietening of what's called the default mode network. It's part of our brain that's active when we're ruminating, when we're thinking about ourselves, when we're planning to do something, going to the shops, I've got to get to the podcast studio. I've got my default mode network is quite active. It's keeping me focused on what I need to do. If that's overactive, you can get into a loop of self-negative talk or ruminations, which can be features of the depressed mind, where it's hard to feel that life could be better, and you're just going round and round with the same sort of negative self-talk. So by quietening that default mode network, a feature of psilocybin, we can get parts of the brain to open up. We can get suddenly fresh perspectives. Yes, that can lead to hallucinations and visions and a loss of sense of self and time and place. But as somebody comes out of that state, they can suddenly have a fresh view on the world. So maybe the sky doesn't feel sad today, and people often start to talk in metaphors after an experience with psilocybin as they grasp for words to describe what they went through. But we also know that with both medications, we get increased neuroplasticity, that is the tendency of the brain to grow new neurons and make new connections. And so we do know physiologically there's a change in the brain as well, not just a psychological one. And we know that effect is, peaks over 7 days after treatment. And that gives us a chance to also, lock in some of these newer perspectives on life and oneself that can guide somebody to recovery.
So it's basically creating new pathways or allowing for the potential for that in the brain.
That's right. Perhaps both. We sometimes use the metaphor shaking up the snow globe, letting the snow settle down into new patterns. And you've got now fresh snow to make a new, have a new attitude to life. Yeah.
Which is amazing and typically harder in later life. You normally have much more neuroplasticity when you're younger or do brain training and whatnot, but it sounds like it's not because people aren't doing enough therapy or trying hard enough. It's a actual physiological mechanism as well that comes into play.
That's right. We think of both the importance of that biological window opening up, the new brain growth, the changes that we know structurally are happening in the brain, and also the psychological opening that can lead to new insights and ways of thinking about oneself as well.
Which is amazing. And I'm sure a lot of our healthcare nerds know these pathways, and a few people may have dabbled or even tried the treatment, given it's here in Australia. But I suppose taking a step back, we were chatting before about how it's not exactly anything new, even in the healthcare landscape.
Yes.
And back in my med school days, a group of us stumbled across these papers around the original use cases for MDMA, for PTSD and all this stuff. And it was very positive, and then suddenly it got shut down.
Yes.
So can you tell us a bit about the history of that and what happened and why it's suddenly re-emerging now?
Well, both drugs, psychedelics as a class have fascinating histories, and yes, you're quite right. In the 60s and 70s, psychedelics were some of the most researched treatments in neuropsychiatry, and our medical director would joke that on the cover of the American Journal of Psychiatry and Medicine back in 1960-something, it was psychedelics, the future of psychiatry. And so, for a time there, it was, hot news. It was the next big thing.
So it was the same as 50 years ago. That's
50
wild.
years ago. That's right. And if you look at the rate of publications back then, there was a huge amount of interest. Home names, pharmaceutical companies like Sandoz were making psilocybin. They were making LSD. It was available for prescription. By some accounts, there were 5,000.
Prescription.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's right.
Was it patented? How did that work?
Well, it was. There were some patents around some of these drugs. MDMA itself is over 100 years old, first synthesized in 1912 by a German company, Merck, and then, sort of in some ways rediscovered kind of in the late 70s by a home chemist, Alexander Shulgin, who, quite an interesting character. He had been gifted a home lab for contributions to his bigger company for, I think, producing a pesticide that was quite commercially successful.
Wow.
So he had a home lab where he could dabble, and he spent a lot of time trying to recreate mescaline, which was his favorite hallucinogen, his phenylethylamine. And
love that for him.
And one of his colleagues or acquaintances pointed out this chemical from 1912 that looked like something he would be interested in, and he made it. And as it was his custom, he would take small samples of it and write down the subjective effects, and that one he was particularly interested in because of how it made him feel. He ended up giving some to his wife, and she instantly saw the therapeutic potential, and so she passed it on to a psychotherapist friend of hers, Leo Zaff. And so the first sort of re-emergence of MDMA being tucked away as a drug perhaps with no potential, it was in the mid-1970s, 1978, it started to reappear as a potential treatment for initially in marriage counselling and in therapy. And by all accounts, by 1985, by the time it had sort of leaked out and become a drug of recreational interest, being renamed ecstasy and finding its way in the Dallas nightclubs, MDMA had been given to about 500,000 people, which is an extraordinary thing to think about. So, in some ways, it's now having a reappearance as a treatment, but that's kind of how it started to make its way, back into the community. But in the war on drugs, to your point of earlier, that in the mid-1980s, as people were shutting down these drugs, unfortunately, all the psychedelic research was closed down with it. And so drugs like psilocybin, MDMA, and LSD were all prevented from being studied in a research setting. And we lost that chance to learn from them. Yeah.
Which is a bit crazy. So how did we go from it being completely shut down and even, 10, 15 years ago, it's still being sort of in the back stores of medicine, to it re-emerging and becoming a more academic conversation. And now suddenly Australia is a world leaders in allowing it to take place.
Right. Well, I think there's a logical explanation, but when the war on drugs was taking place and these drugs were being considered for scheduling to make them outlawed, there was a lot of pushback from the psychiatric community at the time. And, the DEA, who was responsible for scheduling drugs, actually had to sort of pause for a bit. It wasn't as easy as just, I can write this drug off. Yeah. They actually did get a lot of pressure to reconsider, given that these drugs were being used, in therapeutic contexts with some benefit. So there were a group of people back then that still believed in the therapeutic potential of these drugs. Some of them, started charitable organizations. Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Science, or MAPS, was one of those, which is quite well known. And they didn't give up the fight, and they gathered, charitable donations and funding to continue the research. And about 15 years after the drug was Scheduled 1, and they were able to get the first human studies underway again. And so the first phase 1 trials were done with charitable funding, which then eventually progressed to phase 2 and phase 3 trials. And so we actually end up having some very good, high-quality clinical studies done of the kind that the medical establishment would recognise and acknowledge, that demonstrated that MDMA, when given alongside therapy in safe settings, can actually have a real benefit for patients with PTSD. Simultaneously, psilocybin studies were taking place in depression and end-of-life anxiety, showing it had therapeutic potential. And on the weight of that data, I think our TGA here had to respond to the fact that they couldn't hold the position that these drugs had no therapeutic value, which is the strict definition of a Schedule 9 drug in Australia. They had to recognise that when given in a controlled setting, they could have therapeutic potential. And so I think they just, they really had to respond to that and really had no choice other than to reschedule, in my mind. And that's where we are today. So on the basis of some pressure and putting that data in front of the regulator, they reacted, and here we are today.
Well, it's great to hear, and still surprising. I'm still surprised now. Yeah. It's very exciting, but you'd think that somewhere like the US perhaps would be leaders in this, but nice to hear that Australia, who do have a very strong reputation for clinical-based evidence and regulation, are leading that.
Yeah.
I suppose, why hasn't there been any other really mind-blowing solutions in the psychiatry space? Obviously, this was developed over 100 years ago, and we've got all these SSRIs, SNRIs, a heap of other classes, but psychiatry seems to have been a bit slow to get off the mark compared to, say, oncology or cardiac disease. It's a bit harder.
Well, you're right there, and I'm not a trained psychiatrist. I'm not going to necessarily claim terrain that's not mine to do so. But psychiatry has a different medical model to those other specialties you mentioned. It is more difficult. We don't necessarily have clear-cut, objective biological markers that can tell us, this person is depressed or not. Usually, the manifestations of a psychiatric illness are symptom clusters, and they are more difficult to describe sometimes and classify. And so without clear mechanical explanations for what's going wrong, it's hard to decide on a solution that could solve those issues. And so I think we've needed to do more research in the field to try and better understand how we can describe psychiatric illnesses in a more detailed and objective way. And I know that there is now today, lots of sort of research and interest in that area. And I think that's sort of what had kept people out of the psychiatric space for a while in developing treatments, because we weren't really sure what we were actually trying to change. Whereas psychedelics, on the other hand, give us, allow therapy to come in, this softer, stranger art form in some ways. And it is there to complement and supplement the therapeutic process or psychotherapeutic process, which is starting to yield really terrific results. So, it is a different paradigm of thinking about healthcare. Yeah,
for sure, very different. Science and art, and big mixture needed. Jumping back to, I suppose, what you guys are doing on this front, can you tell us a little bit about the clinical process that patients are going through.
Yeah.
It's been super exciting to watch you guys grow so quickly, or what feels like quickly the last little while with this sudden momentum, and having backers like Medibank and the Department for Veterans Affairs coming in and seeing the value and or potential for these populations. Yeah. But what are these populations actually going through really quickly?
I'd love to describe that. So under the Australian law, we're only allowed to give MDMA for PTSD and psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. Now, that distinction may be shown to be arbitrary in the future as trials are showing that perhaps these treatments can help with both conditions. But today we're kind of confined to those two lanes. So a patient needs to present having demonstrated that they have some difficulty responding to traditional treatments, that they would be good candidates for us. And then we do a careful screening process. We look for, obviously, their general health, and we look for confirmation of their diagnosis. We make sure that they've tried other things, and ideally that they've had some experience with therapy. This is a very therapy-orientated intervention, and so it is helpful, we believe, that patients are aware of that and have some familiarity with what's involved. And then, assuming they pass it through the screening phase, then they'll be introduced to two therapists, and they have what's quite unique is they'll have a therapy dyad that kind of guides them through the entire treatment journey from the beginning to end. They get to know these two individuals very well. These are experienced, highly trained, trauma-informed therapists who will first meet with the patient, and they will talk them through the program. They'll set intentions, goals for therapy, make them feel comfortable about the process ahead, and really get them ready for the dosing day, which is kind of in everyone's mind the exciting part.
Set the scene.
Set the scene, that's right. Get the mindset right. It's important to go in with the right, perspectives and attitudes for the treatment, and a willingness to engage, and a curiosity, I think, is really helpful too.
Yeah.
And then on the dosing day, they arrive in our clinic. We have a space, feels a little bit like this. This could be a treatment room. It's soundproofed and cozy, and ideally a low stimulus and comfortable. We have music that plays through the room, and we have usually a treatment bed for patients to lie down on if they like. And they'll take the medication in the morning. About an hour and a half into the session, it'll come on, and they'll start to feel the effects of it. Slightly different for MDMA and psilocybin, but they'll know the effects are definitely kicking in about 90 minutes to 2 hours in. And there, the role of the two therapists who are with them the entire time and paying attention is there to hold space, comfort the patient, guide them to their intentions, and do therapy as they can. And the drug effect will last, depending on the medication, 6 to 8 hours. So it's a very long day, and our therapists don't leave the room, so it's quite intensive.
Right.
And it can be very emotional for patients. It sometimes can feel, they can feel elation, they can feel confused, they can be distressed. There's a whole gamut of emotions that might come up in that session.
Big spectrum.
And our therapists are there to keep them safe and contained the whole time. Then the patient will return the next morning for what is the first of an integration session. It's more therapy in the sober state, try and make sense of what happened in the dosing day and start to put the pieces together again. And they'll have 2 more of those before another dosing session. And so under our program, MDMA is usually 2 to 3 doses, and psilocybin is usually 2 doses for that condition. And obviously we're tracking patients through the whole time, and we see improvement after every treatment. And we also see ongoing improvement, once the treatment's finished too, as patients start to take control of their lives again, get back into the workforce, repair relationships. And that's wonderful to see too, that, from our data, now we've treated over 100 patients. We're seeing this, rapid improvement, but it appears very durable for a majority of patients as well, which is terrific to see.
Huge. That's awesome to hear.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming you guys are measuring this as well to collect evidence on
we are, absolutely.
As well.
So we know the field is still skeptical of these treatments. They've arrived, like you said, through the rescheduling pathway, so not a typical drug development pathway, which is what's being pursued in the US. So these drugs are available to us through these mechanisms, but without the typical guidance on how best to prescribe them or who for. So we're deeply interested in understanding who responds best to these treatments, how many treatment cycles one should get, what the experience is like going through treatment, how best to pair people with therapists, etc. There's a long list of interesting questions about how best to deliver these treatments, which we're really interested in. So we pay very close attention to what's happening. We record all of the sessions with consent as well, and so that forms part of our governance and ensuring safety of patients, but also helps us train the next generation of therapists as well. We believe there's a huge opportunity to optimize and refine the care model, the training. Really, these treatments are showing tremendous promise. And like you said, we're now seeing, thankfully, support from funders like Medibank and the DVA, who recognise they have a big problem there. Traditional treatments aren't necessarily helping patients as much as they could do. This might be a new path forward. But to attract more funders, we're going to need to continue collecting good data and demonstrating that these treatments are effective. And so, we hope to teach not only other clinicians in Australia how to provide them, but overseas as well, as these treatments become more interesting, more accepted.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I suppose on that pathway as well, we're seeing a lot of hype around ketamine and other new classes of both psychedelic and non-psychedelic, I guess, potential drugs emerge.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on that and where these treatments all fit together? Is it going to be one wins, or is it's all mass advance and all potential?
Well, humans are incredibly complicated. We need as many tools as we can get. And I think there'll be an explosion of interesting therapies. They'll have different delivery routes, whether you inhale them or take them orally. There'll be fast-acting ones and slow-acting ones. There'll be and everything in between. And we really need all of those to at our fingertips. And I think the more tools you give great clinicians, the better outcomes we'll have for patients over the long term. We're also in a busy healthcare system with other strains and stresses and limitations. And so, there may be practical reasons why a fast-acting antidepressant like an S-ketamine might be, preferable to a more involved, perhaps more emotionally intense experience like a true psychedelic-assisted therapy session. And so patients will have different levels of interest in these different treatments as well, and our healthcare system will have different capacities to provide them as well. So the more variety we have, I think, the better.
Great to see. Yeah. And I suppose with my 10 Mile hat on, obviously we've got Xylo who are doing great things with new different candidates for drugs that are emerging very quickly.
Yes.
Just last week, we saw a company bought out for $3.2 billion US in the space, and the FDA has just come out with some new guidelines as well.
Yes.
What's your take on how the field is evolving? It feels very rapid at the moment. You guys are set up to run clinical trials, and that's one of the world first, if not the world first, ready to do that.
Yeah. Well, look, I think I feel like we're on the right side of history. I mean, maybe 3 or 4 years ago we were perhaps seemingly a bit more contrarian, before the legislation changed. But it's terrific to see, the growing acceptance of these treatments, the recognition that we do have a problem. We need fresh ideas for tackling our most difficult to treat mental health conditions, where it's got a huge amount to teach us about, not just how best to care for patients who are unwell mentally, but what we could learn about ourselves as well. So I just feel there's a tremendous amount of potential in this field. And so, it's wonderful to see the hard work of those, dedicated, believers who committed themselves to doing the research and doing the difficult thing, and now starting to get the recognition for that. And we're seeing regulators respond and start to open up pathways and give guidance on how these treatments can be provided safely, how these drugs can become approved medicines. And so I feel that, there's only one direction I see that this will go. And I think, Australia's in a really unique position to kind of lead the world and teach people how these can be delivered safely and benefit as many patients as possible.
Which is super exciting.
Awesome.
And speaking of, I suppose, the clinical trial side of things, what programs are you watching closely and most excited by at the moment?
Yeah. Well, I think, one of the ones that's hopefully really imminent is the program of Compass Therapeutics. They're a psilocybin program. They're likely to be the first to get FDA approval, which I think will be a massive watershed moment for the sector. These large acquisitions are pretty exciting already. That is in some way validation that traditional pharma moving in to a field that was, a no-go zone for many decades. But the first FDA approval, I think, will be incredibly important. We still face here in Australia a lot of skepticism from college groups being reluctant to embrace psychedelics, from funders still considering this as an unapproved medication. And so that last line of defense, if you will, or that last excuse that these are unapproved medications, when that falls, when these approvals do come, I think then we're going to start to see what we really need is more funding support. The care model I described is very expensive. There's a lot of touch time, a lot of therapists. We need to pay them well to do this work. It's quite involved. But yet it can help people avoid hospitalization. It can avoid unnecessary care. It can make a big difference to someone's life if you can get them into remission quickly rather than let them suffer for so long. So I think there is a net benefit to the health system to fund these treatments and make the investment, but we just need more funders to get comfortable with that. So I think as these approvals start to roll forward, we'll see more and more of that.
Awesome. Yeah. And is there anything else that we need to see or do to help get more funding into the space and make this more mainstream? Obviously, we're seeing, the first movers like Medibank and yourselves and others in the space come in and collect all this clinical data and work slowly towards it. But what else do we need to make this more accessible and more reliable and a thing that people can trust and bet on?
Probably two things I'd like to see. I think, major funders clearly need to see the health economic benefit for these treatments as well. And so as the clinical data starts to line up with the health economic improvements, then that's going to be, the evidence they need to kind of get behind it, the proof points to put the money down and realize that it's cost benefit.
Show me the money. It's always about money at the end of the day.
And I always find it a little bit frustrating because poorly treated mental health can be so expensive. Not just for the individual, but for the community, the family, and so and while our treatments may be $10,000 a dosing cycle, again mostly due to labour cost in that commitment. That's fairly small when we're happy to pay $50,000 for a knee replacement or these other things that happen in the medical community too. So, perhaps people are a little bit unaccustomed to paying that kind of money for psychiatric interventions, but I think that will change. Health economic data will be a big win, and then obviously continue to show good outcomes, from patients clinically as well.
Completely. It's awesome to see people like yourselves really trying to quantify with the qualitative data as well, because I'm not sure about you, but I mean, I've had friends who have done this, perhaps not in the traditional channels, and there's always the anecdotal stuff, but the trouble with medicine is bringing that all together and creating that body of data that we rely on. And
it's true, and we actually deal with a real problem, which is not everything that we can measure matters, and not everything that matters can be measured. And we'll have patients still symptomatic, but they'll say, "Look, I'm still dealing with the physical reality that I've lost a limb or I lost a loved one, but I'm much better off. Like I'm still I'm making progress. I can see a path forward." And so we do a pulse check of their mental status. It might be still seem quite low, but we know they're on a better path. So this is part of our challenge as well, is trying to come up with a better way of describing human flourishing, if you will, and that's also an opportunity as well.
Completely. Yeah. It's funny how for so long medicine really separated the psychological and physiological and physical health.
Yes.
And we're starting to see that come more back together, which is great, but it's strange that it was such a strong departure for so long, and it's finally being reintegrated, and it's quite a challenging thing.
It's cool, yeah. I mean, the nature of drug-assisted therapy is is a cool combination. It's kind of like forcing these two worlds to work together, yeah.
And back to Emyria, if you guys are to succeed and everything keeps going on the path that it is, where do you see yourselves in 10 years? What's the scene?
So we have a really active innovation agenda as well, which sort of runs behind the scenes. So we're interested in obviously learning with our patients as much as possible. We can see huge potential to refine and improve the care delivery model, make it more scalable, more affordable, and we think we have a lot to teach, not only clinicians in Australia, but around the world as they embrace these therapies. So I think there'll be a huge role for us in teaching, in training, in tooling up clinicians around the world to provide these treatments, but also helping those who are developing these drugs as well. The infrastructure that we're laying down, the clinical infrastructure, the expertise, very, very important for new drug developers trying something unique and intense and unproven. So we need infrastructure like ours to help evaluate that next frontier of drugs. But then we think of where the technology is moving as well, that there's tremendous interest in how we can improve therapist training, how we might be able to help track patients' well-being outside the clinic. We're also interested in our own drug development programs as well, knowing that there is, we're unlikely to have landed on the very best molecules we possibly have. I think we can improve them, make them safer. We can change things like the speed of action so we can get them to work more quickly or over a longer period of time. So just, there's many frontiers of innovation that we feel we're right on the frontier of that we'd like to help push forward.
Exciting. So stay tuned and we'll be even more of a world leader in the category. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. That's always the goal. Yeah, that's right. Well, the need is so great. Yeah, and, I used to joke that even if half of all of the Australian therapists switched to psychedelic-assisted therapy, there'd still be many decades to get through all the patients. So I think, we have a huge unmet need. We need as much resourcing and effort and innovation to tackle that as possible.
So it sounds like it's actually more of an infrastructure and education issue as well.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I think the drug discovery part is being accelerated by AI, by these large dollars moving into the space. We're going to end up with a bottleneck of actually care delivery, which is very much a human relational effort, and so we're going to need more infrastructure like the one we're providing.
We all come back to people at the end of the day. And
well, hopefully there's a role for us. Yeah. In the future. Yeah.
Are there any other big bottlenecks you currently see beyond funding and the tooling side?
I think, training obviously is a bottleneck. I think we could certainly benefit from some more sensible, regulation as well. We've definitely got, it's terrific to have a model by which we can provide these treatments under authorised prescriber. It's still quite restrictive in who they allow to be a lead therapist. And so we'd like to see an embracing of a wider variety of disciplines recognised as being suitable lead therapists in our treatment, and also, sensible state laws that allow us to, learn with our patients and basically respond to what we're seeing. We're a little bit restricted in some of the care treatments we can provide based on what various state laws allow us to do. But I think we're learning faster than their regulations can keep up. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Bit like AI.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
All right. So the things we need to change, we need to prove clinical evidence, get more funding, hopefully change some regulations and put down more infrastructure and educate. Is that right?
Yeah.
Awesome. And if we fast forward to 2035 and psychedelic therapy is now mainstream, what's the world look like?
It's going to be very different to what it looks like today, and I don't think we can blame psychedelics for all of those changes. But look, I think as the way these treatments work are likely to have beneficial effects on just well people and those that are dealing with relational issues or even their own personal journeys. And so I could imagine as the acceptance and understanding of these treatments becomes more well understood, that we'll see greater access to these treatments for regular people. I mean, these are some of the safest drugs when given in safe environments, and so but they have potential to change our perspectives on ourselves and our life around us, and it could benefit someone who's not necessarily struggling, but simply just in a rut or wanting a fresh perspective on life. And so I think there is a role perhaps for these treatments to just help well people reevaluate where they are and what else they could be doing with their lives.
We can all always grow, right? So
that's right,
I'm sure there's always a role for that.
Definitely. Yep.
Awesome. Well, we might kick off with a final rapid fire round.
Oh, gosh, okay.
So answer as quick as possible.
Yep.
First thing that comes to mind, no right or wrong answers, of course.
Yep.
What is the most overhyped thing in psychedelics right now?
That it cures everything. It's not a one-shot solution. There's still a lot of preparation involved and a bit of work to be done afterwards as well. You need to go in willing to do effort. Yeah.
What's the most underhyped?
I think psychedelics as a treatment for these conditions is probably underhyped. I think it's probably still under-recognised and it's unfairly scrutinised or I guess marginalised as a treatment. It has a role as a treatment earlier on in someone's mental health journey. We shouldn't wait to the end, to everything else has failed. Over time, hopefully we'll see psychedelics being offered closer to first-line treatment for some conditions. I think it will make a real benefit, a real difference to some patients' outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it'll save many years of suffering, a lot of
That's
money
right.
for people and society. So
That's right. It's underhyped in that currently it's thought of as the treatment of last resort,
yeah.
where it has so much more potential benefit. Perhaps bringing before somebody's settled into these these negative patterns, we could probably make we could circuit break those states of mind
almost a bit
earlier
more
on.
Preventative in
That's
nature,
right.
as well. A lot of healthcare is finally moving this time. What's your favorite emoji?
The flexing arm.
Flex.
Yeah.
You love a good flex.
Yeah, that's
okay.
it. Yeah.
Is that gym or just?
No, I think that's just everyone does the usual thumbs up, but I think the flex is like just you're strong, you can do it.
Show your strength. Assert.
Yeah.
We love.
Yeah.
If you had to pick one, MDMA or psilocybin?
I think for our early experience, MDMA is easy to work with. We have a lot of experience with that. I think it's a wonderful drug with lots of potential.
Nice. When you're not deep in the weeds of healthcare, what's your favourite indulgence?
Look, I love playing guitar, but more than that, I probably love playing with my kids. I love taking them camping and out into the wild and seeing them turn into wonderful little people.
Love it. How old are they?
My son's 14, my daughter's 12.
Oh, exciting age.
Yeah, it's a cute age.
Terrifying though, kids these days.
Oh, really? No, they're great.
No?
It's great. It's probably the best thing I've ever done. Yeah, so it's wonderful. I've loved all the stages so far. I'm not in the mean age of years, but I think bringing up kids it's been really, really, really awesome.
Love that.
Yeah.
And what is one resource or show, book, newsletter, thing you like to read, listen to that you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah. Look, I have a book that I always recommend. It's a bit nerdy. It's called The Beginning of Infinity. It's by a physicist and philosopher, David Deutsch, who basically has this very optimistic view of humanity and frames it that what our true goal is the pursuit of good explanations, and humans have this really unique capability for coming up with creative explanations for problems in the world. And so he's got this wonderful optimistic sort of perspective, and makes me feel that we'll still have a role to play in this AI future that we're heading towards.
Good.
And then another one is the Moonshots podcast, which I like listening to, which is kind of these deliberately optimistic takes on science and the future, which I think we can all do with.
Awesome. Definitely need some more optimism. I feel like things have been a bit cynical lately. It's a lot.
There is a lot, yeah.
Last but definitely not least, if you could share just one message with our awesome audience of health nerds,
yes,
whether it's about psychedelics or medicine in general, what would that be?
I do try and emphasize when I speak to people, and that is, as clinicians, you have an opportunity to learn with your patients. They want their story to matter, and often we overlook the contribution that they can make to a shared understanding. So I think of yourselves if you're as a clinician as a participant in the knowledge generation process, and involve your patient in that as well. And I think that means paying attention, being curious, asking more than perhaps what is going on in their lives, trying to measure what's happening, and really be part of the evidence creation effort, and we'll all benefit.
Beautiful. So back to the humanity in healthcare.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. This has been an awesome conversation, and I feel like we could genuinely be here all day.
Yes.
But it's been awesome to learn a bit more about what you guys are up to and delve into psychedelics beyond the hype and the real potential that it brings to changing healthcare and mental healthcare for everyone.
Well, I appreciate your interest and questions, and thanks for this opportunity. Appreciate it.
Well, that's all for today, guys. Thanks for following along. Of course, like, subscribe, all that jazz. Share with someone you think might find this interesting. And until next time, see you later.